Hmm.
David is pretty, I would say, clinically diagnosable if you want to read some of the Psalms. I would also say that Paul was too. I always go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 1. 2 Corinthians is probably one of my favorite books, and the joke in my in my church context is like all the books that I preach from are my favorite, but 2 Corinthians I revert to quite frequently. And
Hmm.
especially chapter 1, where Paul is explaining, this recent delay, why he hasn't, come to see them, why they're getting another letter from him. And even after these guys who kind of like are distracting the Corinthians, why he's having to kind of defend his reputation, so to speak, throughout this letter. And he says, I think it's in chapter 1, verse 8, that he and his team basically were despairing of their lives to the point where they thought they were about to die. They were in such a dire, discouraging, and yes, even we could say depressive state where just things are being prevented from them. There's almost like this blockade of where that's preventing them from actually quote doing ministry, that they thought they were about to be given over to death. And then he says, like right after that it through all of that, what he clung to was the power of Jesus, the resurrected Lord. He talks about the resurrection right after that in verse 10, which again speaks to this notion of Paul was very forthright with what he dealt with, in a way that was still hopeful, and also in a way that wasn't, attention seeking. It was like, we can be, in fact, he says that right before that, like the verses like 3-7 of 2 Corinthians 1, where he's talking about, we are given the ministry of comfort because we've been comforted by the God of all comfort in the midst of our discomfort. And that kind of like circular, you could say, vortex of comfort is essential to the proclamation of the gospel, where we're receiving this amazing grace from Christ. And then as we proclaim the gospel to others, whether it's in a small group, whether it's in a coffee shop, or whether it's in a congregation, we are quite literally dispensing the word of comfort, the word of promise, which comforts others in their discomfort. So again, that doesn't occur if you're being a little bit recoiled with that comfort, with you're saying, oh, it's only just for this type of suffering. No, it's very broad, but it's also like specific to each individual's circumstances or situation. And that's the amazing sort of, you could say, undercurrent of the gospel, is how it speaks to each individual in a unique way.
I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Like, I wonder if some of the issue is that it comes down to even the definition of faith itself. And I'm kind of remembering now, we maybe had a discussion about this when you're writing the book. But it seems to me that when you define faith as a muscle to flex, you have to necessarily also define mental illness as something to be overcome by the muscle of faith that the individual Christian is completely in control of strengthening and developing. So mental health issues then are a real problem because there's not a place for them when that's your definition. You have to rid yourself of